one of the most important decisions and one of the most tricky is whether your child goes off to senior school at 11 plus or 13 plus. I will say one marginally controversial thing at this moment. Now, bear in mind, I run a prep school for children aged 3 to 13. Therefore, you're not going to be surprised if I was to say to you, children staying in a prep school from age 11 to 13, actually from those years 7 and 8, 11 to 13, is unbelievably beneficial to them in terms of their development. I am more cross than I can tell you that senior schools are raiding prep schools and taking our children. And what I mean by that is this. There is no reason why senior schools should be taking more children, certainly at age 10. They're not the experts on prep school education. Why take prep school children? They're in the right place. They're in prep schools. Prep schools are the experts at teaching children of this age. There we go. That's my little cri de coeur of the morning. But you then need to make a decision. So I'm not even going to talk about 10 plus. But you then need to make a decision about whether your children are going to jump out at age 11 or at age 13. Now, actually, it is quite a complicated decision. If you have a daughter and you are going to send her to a London day school, then the likelihood is she is going to leave her prep school at age 11. And the reason I say that is because whilst there are certainly some day places for girls at 13, so schools like Emmanuel, Allane's, there are certainly some day places at 13. There's nothing like the number of places that are available for boys at 13. For boys, it's a far more nuanced decision. And you know that historically in this country, boys stayed in their prep schools till they were 13. Why? Because any of us who are parents of sons know that boys' development is not like the girls'. And for many of those boys, at age 11, they're barely out of the starting blocks, and they need to be in their prep schools a little bit longer. Now, at 13, it's a very, very different business, but it's complicated. It used to be, in days of yore, that boys and girls would sit their common entrance in the summer of year 8, and that was pretty well what it was. That simply isn't the case anymore. And very many boarding schools and day schools, so schools like Westminster, King's College, Wimbledon, all of these schools, St Paul's, will pre-test the children in year 6. So you cannot delay making that decision until the boys are 12 or 13. That you would have missed the boat on most of those schools. So my next piece of really practical advice is be very mindful of registration deadlines, and for heaven's sake, don't miss the boat because you thought you had time on your side. You can always change your mind later and withdraw and not go through the process, but make sure you haven't missed the pre-tests that happen in year 6. Another little point I'm going to say here, those pre-tests aren't pre-tests, they're entrance exams. Don't be fooled by the title. So a pre-test means this is when they're going to make their decision about whether they're going to offer your boy or girl a place. So register, don't miss deadlines. It's better to register for too many schools rather than, as I say, find yourself being caught out. You must visit. Even running a prep school, I would never offer a place to a child who wants to come into nursery or reception if the parents have never darkened the door. Because obviously, if they've never visited, they're not serious about Newton Prep. You know, I mean, I must just be, I can't imagine why, but I must only be one of their backup options. So I would never offer. I will only offer somebody who's actually taken the time and trouble to come to the school. So I know you would do the same. Be sensible about the number of schools that you enter your child for. And again, one of the things that makes me slightly want to cry is when parents say, oh, no, we're not really interested in 10 plus, but we're going to put him out there to see how he does. Why would you do that? Unless you're serious about them going for 10 plus or 11 plus exams, don't put them out there just for practice. I mean, that sounds slightly cruel to me. So, be sensible about how many schools you enter them for. What I say to parents for age 11, I say, I think less than 5 would worry me, frankly. over 7, I think you're mad. So you've sort of got to get that right. And again, a little bit will depend. If your child is super duper clever, then it may be that you can take the risk and only enter for 3 schools. But that is a risk because the competition for places is so intense. What else would I would say to you? Make sure you talk to your prep school or primary school. We know the children really well. You don't have to listen to our advice. So if I say to you, your child is very unlikely to get in there, it doesn't mean to say you shouldn't enter. And what I would normally say to parents is, look, I think this is an aspirational option. But there is no harm in having aspiration in your set of choices, but make sure you've got a couple of realistic options in there as well. What else do I want to say to you? The process really then, very quickly, I'm aware of time is ticking. At age 11, the likelihood is that most schools will do entrance exams in the January of year 6. And most schools will ask for maths, English. Many will ask for verbal reasoning and non-verbal reasoning. Why? Because those reasoning tests are meant to be an indicator of a child's underlying potential rather than a test of what they've been taught by their school or crammed by tutors. So verbal reasoning and non-verbal reasoning, you notice there was a little barb there. I might come back to that in a moment. So but actually, doing a bit of verbal and non-verbal reasoning practice at home, I think, makes perfect sense. Schools play it differently about who they call for interview. So some 11 plus schools call everybody forward for interview and say, well, have a look at them all. Others say, no, actually, you've got to at least have done creditably in the academic hurdle, and then we'll call forward a certain number for interview. And again, the website will tell you that. I think for all of us in schools, we are worried about the pressure that these little children are under. And I ought to just mention the London Consortium of Girls' Schools, and that consists, I just made a little list of them. So that's schools like Channing, Francis Holland, Godolphin and Latimer, Morehouse, Notting Hill and Ealing, Queen's College, Queensgate, Southampton, St James. They realise that what we're asking the children to do is unfair. And as from 2020, what they're going to do is bring them forward for one 1-hour paper only. And that's the only written test they're going to do. And it's going to be reasoning. It's not going to be maths and English. And then they're going to do something creative in their interview process. And, thank the Lord, are going to go back to prep schools and say, tell us about this girl. And thank heavens for that London Consortium. And I hope others might go their way. But that's coming along. 13 plus, as I said to you, that a number of schools, very few will not see the children to year 8. Now, there are some noticeable exceptions. So, for instance, if you think of boys' schools like Dulwich College, take a big number of boys at 13. Dr. Spence is speaking later this afternoon, actually. And hallelujah for that. And I was at Dulwich before I was at Newton Prep, and I ran their junior school. And what Joe and the staff at Dulwich understand is just the point I made a few sentences ago, is that many boys are not ready for selection at age 11. But take them in year 8 when they're 13, my goodness, they've advanced, they've grown, they've matured, and Dulwich then will look at them in the January of year 8, never having seen them before. So it's not all pre-testing. Whitgift the same. We'll see boys at 13 plus and would never have seen them before. Trinity, the same. So in other words, there are schools where you don't get pre-tested, but the majority of 13 plus schools will pre-test either in year 6 or in year 7. And then they'll have the kids back and do some other testing with them and interview them and take our references. So a few things I've said this morning, which you may or may not agree with. I completely understand, but as I say, I try to bat out a few things just to make you think a little bit. The pre-test isn't a pre-test, it's an entrance exam. Don't be seduced or don't be fooled by their title. On a business model, senior schools want you in early. They want your money. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing educationally for your child to go. Tutoring, well, okay, I'm a bit of a pragmatist about tutoring. Some heads will say tutoring is, the devil's spawn, don't ever do it. Now, actually, I'm a little bit more nuanced than that. If your child has got, say, an uneven profile, very good at maths, very weak at English, a little bit of English tuition could help. If they've got confidence issues and do very poorly in exams, just don't seem to manage the whole business of exams, A little bit of one-on-one, I mean, we all know that, don't we? A little bit of one-on-one help and encouragement and boosting can be really nice. But don't think that tutors get people into schools. And, you know, I often think if things go horribly wrong at Newton Prep, Rosellen, I think, you know, I could just throw in the towel and run my own tuition business. And I think I'd be a very wealthy woman in no time at all.